doctors looked at me, 21 years old, professional athlete, six pack in shape. I was a picture perfect example of health on the outside. When that diagnosis came, I was actually on my way to get an MRI report from a concussion a couple days prior. I had fallen, hit my head one day training with a helmet, still got a concussion. And I never expected to be told, you may have cancer, you'll never ride your bike again, and you may die. I felt sorry for myself. I felt the fear, the anxiety, the worry, the doubt, the why me. Literally asked the doctor, why is this happening to me? Am I a bad person? Those were the first things that came to mind, followed up by, I'm gonna die. Health is actually internal. And it took that diagnosis for me to look internally. To me, nutrition, or what we put in our mouths, is probably the most important choice that we have a decision to make every single day, besides what we choose to put in our minds. Well, thanks for the intro, and it's truly an honor to be here today. This is one of my favorite topics, talking about nutrition, and I love talking about it because I learned the hard way of prioritizing my health via the choice that I have every day, which I think, to me, nutrition, or what we put in our mouths, is probably the most important choice that we have a decision to make every single day, besides what we choose to put in our minds. And that's another one of my favorite topics. But in light of today, talking about nutrition, it came to me the hard way, as I mentioned. I got diagnosed when I was 21 with a brain tumor. I was living beyond what I thought was fathomable for my life, living my dream and some. And it really took that day for me to audit what I was doing. And something that really stood out to me is that saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. Well, the inverse of that concept is what almost killed me. The doctors looked at me, 21 years old, professional athlete, six pack in shape, you name it. I was a picture perfect example of health on the outside. And something I love talking about is how health is actually internal. And it took that diagnosis for me to look internally. And the backstory to that day, which was in March of 2010, was it'd been about a year that I've been having these headaches, these migraines, these vision problems, vomiting. Some days were better than others. Some days I was purely riding on willpower and muscle memory because my vision was so poor. Some days the headaches were so bad I just buried myself in my bed and turned the lights off, and hopefully I'd wake up and be out of pain. So when that diagnosis came, I was actually on my way to get an MRI report from a concussion a couple days prior. I had fallen, hit my head one day training with a helmet, still got a concussion, and I needed to make sure there was no swelling, no bleeding, no traumatic brain injury. And I never expected to be told, you may have cancer, you'll never ride your bike again, and you may die. I thought, worst case scenario, another 10 days off the bike, could be worse. And that moment changed my life, not only because my life was threatened, but it really showed me the courage that I had and the determination to audit myself. Now, many may think, being a professional athlete, I would have had my nutrition in check, I would have had my mindset in check, my exercise, and all these things. But in BMX, it's still very, how would we word it, underground. Still, it's coming out to be a mainstream sport. The Olympics are taking place in less than 100 days. BMX freestyle, like the X Games style riding, is going to be there for the first time. But there's not much focus on being an athlete and fueling yourself properly. And we knew eating this and that were bad, but we didn't understand the level of how severe these choices could be. We thought they're just fuel. And because I was trained to think by society, oh, I look good, so I must be healthy. That was very incorrect. So I took that day by myself, getting diagnosed, hearing the words, you may have cancer, you'll never ride your bike again, you may die. For me, really to wake up, essentially. And I, felt sorry for myself. I felt the fear, the anxiety, the worry, the doubt, the why me. Literally asked the doctor, why is this happening to me? Am I a bad person? Those were the first things that came to mind, followed up by, I'm gonna die. I had never really understood tumors, cancer, benign, malignant, any of things like that as it pertained to my well-being and my reality. And so for that moment, it really got me to think oh man, I could die. Not the fact that my sport could create, an opportunity to get severely injured or, die in my sport, which is very real. But this moment was one of those wake-up calls. And something, before I move on to talking about the journey after nutrition, something I also like to talk about is the idea between perceived fear and actual real experienced fear. And I mean fear for your life. That moment I was sitting there by myself, 21 years old, family's 14 hours north of Massachusetts, I'm in North Carolina, and I get told this information. Nothing of my reality had changed besides the information that came in my mind. My body triggered fear for my life, and I felt all those emotions, and I started creating these beliefs and these worries about my life. Now, fast forwarding about a week and a half to when I had surgery, which my surgeon at Duke actually moved some of his patients out of the way to get me in sooner. It was that severe. There was this transition, this shift. I remembered my mom, her battling colon cancer, alive and well today, did it with a smile on her face, kept it for me while I ventured off to live my dream, which I feel like only a mother could do. Lance's story really inspired me, another cyclist. Different objective, keep the wheels on the ground. Mine is to go upside down and land safely. But another cyclist going through what I thought was worse, brain, lung, and testicular cancer, they're still telling me it could be benign, which thankfully it was benign, even though it came back multiple times. We'll talk about that. But I saw this model for me. It was, the word role model, as we grow up, it becomes more and more real when we get to where we are in our lives and looking at the things that we perceived and how we model that. So I saw my mom, I saw Lance, and then I had the support of the BMX community telling me, I got this. And all of those things created a shift in me to shift my focus from, the easy route. What if I don't wake up? What typically humans experience, the doubts, the worries, the fears, what we don't want. But something inside of me, which I'm very aware of now, but back then I didn't realize this was happening, I started focusing on what do I want to do when, not if, when I wake up. It was a 6-hour surgery, and I knew there was a real amount of risk. I actually had to sign off of the legal paperwork being an adult. But I kept focusing on what I was doing and what I wanted to do and how life would be different when I woke up. Nutrition fell into that role. And so, moving forward, 6-hour brain surgery, 75 staples, 16 stitches from my forehead all the way back, 4 titanium screws later, I woke up, I could see, I could hear, I could feel, I could move. I was a little loopy from the drugs, of course, but it was the first time in a year and a half I wasn't suffering from pain. And it just was like this new shot at living, this new second chance at life. That statement was very real for me. And so when nutrition comes in, there was no talk about what I should or shouldn't eat. There was just, for the recovery, which was actually 5 weeks, I was riding again. That was phenomenal. But it was like, all right, these first 4 weeks, let's just worry about keeping your blood pressure down, your heart rate down, of course. But there was no mention of what you should be not eating. Of course, we know, eating processed foods and alcohol and sugars and all that stuff is bad, but that was never told to me. There was never any guidance. I actually went and self-taught myself from being curious. And so when I was recovering, and a couple months after, when I would go back to competing, a friend shared a documentary with me on Netflix, and it made the interaction of food and our health so real for me and so simple. And I was like, man, this makes so much sense. And so I began changing my way of eating. And I stopped consuming as much alcohol as I was consuming. I still lived in East Carolina University town, party university, and we worked hard and then we partied hard. That was my lifestyle. I was also accustomed to that from covering up the pain and suffering that I was going through and using my success as an excuse to I can do what I want. So that was the first thing. I stopped drinking as much alcohol. I started to consider how much sugar and processed foods I was eating. I started limiting that, and I started adding in these healthier foods. And over time, that just became more and more of a lifestyle, and I started to feel better. I started to look different, and I still had, the toxic foods and chemicals from processed foods and alcohol. It's still, of course, being consumed. And it wasn't until a second diagnosis 2 years later where I really got a wake-up call again, oh, okay, maybe there's more to do. And that diagnosis was interesting because the first one was just, fear, anxiety, I'm gonna die, what do I do, am I a bad person, all those things. Second one was a little bit of that, but more, I did this once, I can do it again. But what else can I do to optimize my nutritional intake? How can I improve my mind? How can I improve how I live my life? And I just kept progressing with that. And I went through gamma knife radiation, so they basically just zapped the 2 tumors that grew back. Actually, the backstory on that was the tumors wrapped around my optic nerve and my artery, so they wanted to make sure they didn't hit either of them because I could have gone blind, become paralyzed, had a stroke, or just died. So they just said it was residual cell growth. Gamma knife took care of it. 4 years later, they kept shrinking and have been stable ever since. So it's been an amazing technology that I actually had to Google and find. I was really frustrated when no one told me about that, but then confirmed, yeah, it's a good choice. But coming out of that treatment, I got really focused on what else can I do? How can I improve my health? And I think it was 3 months later, I blew up my knee, tore my ACL, my meniscus just shattered, just gone. And so I understood, okay, maybe I need to focus on exercise, my physical body, while improving my nutrition. And then throughout that year, this was 2013 now, I started doing some Googling, like what can I do? You know, I'm a high school dropout that got a GED turned professional athlete. I'm not gonna go to college, even though I had those ideas. I was like, that's gonna be like an eight-year journey. I wanna learn now. What can I do? So I started consuming books. Two things that put me on the path today with understanding metabolic health and epigenetics and how we can choose to influence our genetic expression was Dr. David Perlmutter, his book Grain Brain that I read in 2013. And that book to me simplified eating, blood sugar regulation, and how that directly affects and correlates to different aspects of brain performance, brain function, resiliency, and optimization and health ultimately. And I was like, oh, I need to be looking at food a little differently, not all these fruits and vegetables and juices and things, even though they're organic. I need to be looking at my blood. I need to be figuring out what's going to increase my blood sugar, because we know when blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up, inflammation goes up, and all these mechanisms that we want in our favor get suppressed, and the ones that we don't want in our favor, are likely to go up. So that was the first thing when it comes to really diving into nutrition, was that book. And then I found the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I wanted to be someone that could explain why I do this and how it works, and I wanted to help people. I was sharing a lot of the things I was learning. I was getting a lot of pushback, and I felt insecure because I didn't know how to explain the why. And I love asking why. I've been that person since I was a child. Why? Tell me why. How does this work? I love understanding the mechanisms of why something works and what we can do to optimize it. So I went through that program. I got certified as a holistic health coach, and I started adding in Dr. Perlmutter's work and focusing on blood sugar regulation. And as I went through that journey, I got introduced to people like Mark Sisson, Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Daniel Amen. A lot of these people that focus on brain health and optimization and nutrition and the holistic aspect of functional medicine. What we can do in our daily lives and the choices we make that will directly impact our health. And we can track these things with biomarkers. Anyone can go buy a $25 to $45 glucometer and test their blood. Anyone can get an A1C. Anyone can get a glucometer and test for ketone levels. We can do these different things to see what our metabolic health is. And there's so many people out there taking this information and this data and putting it into practical application. Verta Health comes to mind, Dr. Jeff Volk and Stephen Finney, Dr. Eric Westman at Duke University. A lot of these people that practice functional medicine and looking at the choices we have in nutrition, the choices we have with mindset, regulating stress, and exercise, movement, just moving your body, and how all of that correlates to what we can do to optimize our metabolic health, which there's so much data coming out now showing how these things impact health. And Dr. Dom D'Agostino, another great example, using the standard of care for cancer as well as metabolic therapies. And anyone that's interested in this conversation about Metabolic Health Summit is one of the pioneering events, having all these experts from head to toe of different doctors and scientists looking at new research coming out of the choices we have to empower our health with food, with exercise, with mindset. And so, I went on this path of optimizing my health from everything I was learning and applying it. I started tracking my macronutrients. And this is getting into the weeds. This isn't necessary for everyone, but me being a very analytical and optimization data-driven person, I was like, all right, let me just see what I have going on. And I use this as a metaphor of like a map. You may find a destination where you want to go. That map is useless unless you know where you are. So I started tracking my blood. I started tracking everything I was eating, the times, my windows of eating, my sleep, HRV, like everything I could. And I just started getting a little bit better, a little bit better. It started making more sense. I started seeing inside and out. Well, you can't see inside, but I started seeing the outside changes. And I started feeling differently. And then I got connected with people like Dr. Ryan Lowry, Dr. Daniel Amen, and I went through different SPECT imaging. I went through different neurological testing. I had all these data points of blood, of brain function, of MRIs, of SPECT imaging, of all these scans, and I was seeing the changes I was making. And then to start off 2017, I got a third brain tumor diagnosis. So the original diagnosis, massive brain tumor, surgically removed. 2 years later, two grew back, same side, one here and one back here. I got really focused on my health, focused on my performance, started sharing information, started helping other people. 7 years from the surgery, 2017, a third diagnosis showed I had two new tumors on this side of the brain. And that's when they told me they thought it was a genetic thing, genetic kink or something. And that genetic aspect triggered my mind. I was like, oh, I remember learning about epigenetics. I've been hearing this term come up more and more. Dr. Perlmutter was the first person that I ever learned that from. And I know I can do something about, I think we know it's like 70-75% of our genetic makeup can be influenced, which is pretty profound. I think it's Dr. Andy Campitelli, I forget her last name, but she's a Canadian doctor that was doing some presentations on this. And that just 70%, we'll say, of our genetic makeup can be changed to a degree with lifestyle choices. And so when they told me that, I went, okay, it's time to get more serious. I've been hearing about this ketogenic approach that's been doing really well with people with seizures. And there's been some studies showing it's helpful with people with cancer and PCOS, insulin resistance, you name it. There's this correlation, if not direct effect, of mitochondrial health with food. And they're telling me, it's benign, but there's an epigenetic factor here. That's what triggered my mind. And I was like, okay, it's time to get serious. Let's go into this state of ketosis for some time. Let's commit to a year. I'm tracking my blood, I'm tracking my macros. There's just some tweaks. And I learned along the way that there's all these different types of tools we can use. We can, it's what most people think it's like restrictive. It's not. It's a beautiful thing if you understand it correctly. And so I did everything I could to research. I tried things, I had trial and error, I had a lot of fun with it. And the beauty of this was a year later, we got another MRI to check the progress, no progression. The 2 tumors that they found in that year span that popped up on the scan, a year later, there's no progression. Another year later of living this lifestyle, no progression. And so I was like, all right, there's something to this. And I just continued to educate myself, to continue tracking my blood, to continue doing all these different things, and more importantly, having conversations. I took a similar path of BMX, of looking at the people I had posters on my wall. I became friends with them. I became competitors with them. I became training partners with them. And so I went into the metabolic health world and I just started introducing myself, started reaching out. And I eventually found myself speaking at Metabolic Health Summit. These are like the people I look up to, and I became friends with them. And the more I did this, the more I started seeing that there's so much that we can do to empower ourselves, and that these thought leaders, these doctors, these researchers, these scientists, these authors, they're putting in so much work to bring this information out, because we can all agree that it's not widely acceptable that you can change your health from just eating differently, at least to the degree that I've been experiencing and many others have. But we know there's a shift coming. People are tired of being sick and tired and just being prescribed medication after medication. Not that that doesn't play a role, because it saved my life in various different ways. But going back to the diagnosis originally, they kept feeding me pain pills. I later learned I didn't have a pain pill deficiency. I had a massive brain tumor taking over my brain. And because they kept looking at me by my cover and not asking those questions, denying me scans, even though I had health insurance I was paying for, it almost killed me. And then I took the route of self-educating myself, reaching out to these people. And because of that, I believe I'm alive and I'm thriving. I don't like to call myself a brain tumor survivor. I refer to myself as a brain tumor warrior. I don't even like the thriving aspect, but I just took something and I made my own meaning out of it. And that meaning for me was to be able to overcome these obstacles, because one, I had the courage and the strength to do, and I have a responsibility now to share that with other people. And by doing that over the years, I've facilitated the opportunity for people to take that into their own hands and change their lives. And I want to end on one powerful story with this, and it's a friend of mine, we're friends now. 3 years ago, he reached out to me because they were looking at a third brain surgery to remove more brain matter, because his surgeon thought that was creating the seizures he was having. He had 5 to 7 a day every day. After implementing a low-carb ketogenic approach, metabolic therapy approach to his health and well-being, he just went over, I think it was 400 something days just recently, seizure-free, avoiding that third brain surgery, taking more brain matter. And again, that's just one example. But I can't help but feel a responsibility to at least try to share this information with people, because at the end of the day, the worst thing is you improve your health and well-being by doing so, and you improve your quality of life, but maybe it doesn't change, the reality of what you have. I still have 4 brain tumors today. The difference is, I believe, is because I've put all these aspects that I consider health into practice and I continue sharing that with other people. And by doing so, I have a whole different emotional makeup, which again, it's going to affect my biochemistry, my neurochemistry, and it just really puts the opportunity for me to create the ideal version of my life that I live today and to help other people doing that. So to end this, I learned that we can choose to change in a state of pain and suffering, which is what I did. I had to react to a life or death situation, or we can choose to be proactive and change from a state of inspiration and joy. And I love sharing my journey and the mindset changes I've had and these nutritional changes, because to me, I didn't have anyone to look up to that was teaching me the things that I now teach to other people. And I believe if I had that model, then I would have been able to be more proactive and maybe have been able to change the situations I went through, maybe not. But I do know that we have a choice to be proactive with our health rather than waiting for something to happen. And I know that's very common. We say this a lot: if I get the job, I'll be happy. I'll be confident when I lose the weight. But it really comes down to who you decide to be in this moment that's going to live the life that you want moving forward. And that's one of the things that I've taken away from my journey, and I hope to share with other people, and that it reaches them. So I know I've been talking for some time. I could continue talking. This is some of my favorite things to speak about. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about my journey, my perspectives on nutrition, on health, and human optimization. And Suzanne, I appreciate you having me here, and I appreciate everyone for joining. Well, I can definitely share some videos.